Before millions of viewers, Jasmine Crockett calls out Melania Trump exposing a marriage scripted for politics, not love. The White House shakes as image and reality collide. When the curtain falls, what truth will shatter America's trust? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The U.S. Capitol was at full capacity, the hearing chamber blazing with lights and cameras, broadcasting live nationwide. The official topic, the use of family image in politics, was already electrified by the presence of Melania Trump. Outside protesters roared, holding signs high, "Tell the truth, Melania." Inside, the press packed every corner, keyboards clattering, every lens aimed at the woman in the witness chair. Melania sat tall, her posture rigid, her designer suit gleaming under the lights. She projected elegance, but her icy eyes betrayed defiance. Every viewer sensed the mask she wore, every heartbeat in the chamber, waiting for it to crack. Then Jasmine Crockett rose. No pleasantries, no hesitation. Her voice cut like a blade. "Mrs. Melania, did you ever sign divorce papers against President Donald Trump?" The silence was suffocating. Melania smirked, her voice sharp. "I have never considered divorce. Donald and I have a happy, wonderful marriage." The chamber erupted, keyboards clacked, cameras zoomed, the nation gripped by the first strike of a political war. The chamber was still vibrating from Melania's confident denial when Jasmine moved without hesitation. She didn't give her opponent a second to breathe, reaching into her leather case and pulling out a thick stack of papers, the red seal of the New York court blazing under the lights. She raised it high, every camera lens locking onto the pages. Her voice rang clear, sharp enough to slice through the murmurs. "This is the divorce filing of Mrs. Melania Trump, submitted on January 22, 2017, just 2 days after the inauguration." Gasps shot through the room. Senators leaned toward one another in disbelief while reporters hammered at their keyboards as if trying to capture history in real time. The cameras zoomed straight onto Melania's face, capturing every flicker, every twitch of the jaw she struggled to hide. Melania reacted instantly, fury flashing in her eyes. Her voice cracked like a whip as she slammed her hand against the desk. "This is fake. I never signed any such papers." The denial hung heavy, but the tremor in her tone betrayed more than she intended. The audience was riveted, half shocked, half waiting for Jasmine's next move. In that silence, the air itself seemed to pull tight, as if bracing for impact. Jasmine's hand stayed steady, her eyes locked on her target. The evidence was not only in her hands, but in the undeniable weight of the seal, the signatures, the official stamp that carried more authority than any denial could erase. She took one deliberate step forward, pointing to the bold print on the documents for all to see. The court's metadata shows this filing was withdrawn within 72 hours. The reason is clear: it was pulled back at the direct request of lawyers closely tied to Donald Trump. The words fell like stones into the silence, breaking it open. A ripple moved across the chamber. Some senators shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other with raised brows. Others nodded slowly, lips pressed tight as if they had always suspected something rotten beneath the polished surface. Journalists whispered frantically into microphones, narrating the drama as it unfolded for millions watching live across the country. Melania's face tightened, her teeth clenched so hard the strain was visible. She leaned into the microphone, her voice low, but trembling with rage. "My marriage is real. No one has the right to intrude into my family." The words carried defiance, but also desperation, as if she was clinging to a script unraveling in her hands. The chamber reacted with a storm of noise, a clash of whispers, coughs, and the unrelenting click of shutters. The audience was no longer passive. They were watching a mask crack in real time. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her reply was calm, deliberate, and devastating in its precision. She leaned closer, her voice steady and cutting. "No, Mrs. Melania. This is no longer about family. This is a political stage carefully crafted to deceive a nation." The words struck like a hammer blow, echoing across the walls. The room fell still, the silence now more dangerous than noise. The nation was watching not just a battle of words, but the exposure of an image sold as truth. The line had been crossed. This was no longer denial versus accusation. It was evidence versus the myth of perfection. The chamber was still echoing with Jasmine's last strike when Melania snapped. She shot up from her chair, her hands slamming the desk so hard the microphones rattled. Her voice tore through the silence, raw and furious. I gave up my youth for Donald. Who do you think you are to humiliate me like this? The sound reverberated a violent crack that sent a jolt through the room. Gasps rippled across the gallery as every camera zoomed in to capture the eruption. The blast of noise triggered chaos. Republican senators jumped to their feet, voices raised in outrage. Objection. This is abuse of power. Their shouts tangled in the air, swelling into a storm of protest. The chair pounded the gavel over and over, calling for order, but the pounding was drowned out by the roars. The gallery buzzed like a hive, reporters shouting into phones, fingers flying across keyboards. The room felt on the brink of exploding. Jasmine stood firm, unmoved by the uproar. She took half a step closer, her gaze unflinching, her tone as sharp as steel. This is not about your private life. When a president manufactures a fake marriage to manipulate voters, that is political fraud. Her words carved through the noise like a blade, pulling the room back into her grip. Cameras caught the defiance in her eyes, then the tension of a fighter unwilling to yield. Melania clenched her fists, forcing her voice into a shaky declaration. Donald loves me. We've endured everything together. I never wanted to leave him. She spat the words as if each one could hold the wall together. But the wall was cracking. Jasmine cut in without mercy, her tone icy and final. If your marriage is so happy, then why does the divorce filing exist? The chamber froze. Every sound died. Cameras zoomed tight on Melania's face. Her eyes bloodshot, her hands trembling, her jaw locked in defiance. The mask was still on, but it was breaking. The silence that followed Jasmine's last blow was cut short when she reached for the console. With a single press of her finger, the giant screen at the front of the chamber lit up. The crowd leaned forward as the footage rolled. January 2017, the inauguration of Donald Trump. Melania stepped out of the car, her face glowing with a smile as she waved to the cheering crowd. But then the camera caught the instant she turned her eyes toward her husband. The smile collapsed, her expression hardened, and her face fell into shadow. The transformation was undeniable, brutal in its clarity. A ripple tore through the chamber. Senators leaned across the aisle, whispering, some audibly muttering, "I remember this moment." Reporters shot up from their seats, phones lifted, voices racing into live updates. The sound of shutters cracked like gunfire as the image froze on Melania's face, the face of a woman suddenly stripped of joy. It wasn't politics now. It was raw human and impossible to spin. Jasmine stepped toward the screen, her arm raised as if commanding a jury. Her voice cut the chaos like a blade. This moment happened on the very day the divorce papers were filed. This is not coincidence. This is psychological evidence, truth caught in real time. The weight of her words pinned the room. The still frame of Melania's vanished smile loomed overhead, towering over every whisper and gasp. Melania's composure shattered. She lurched forward, her voice shrill with fury. This is edited, fabricated. You people are manufacturing lies. Her shout ricocheted off the marble walls, her desperation bleeding into every syllable. She gripped the microphone so tightly her knuckles turned white, eyes wide with panic. For the first time, her anger sounded less like defiance and more like fear. Jasmine didn't flinch. With a calm, almost surgical in its precision, she turned back to the table and lifted another sheet of paper. She held it up for the cameras, her words deliberate, relentless. Here is an internal White House email from January 25, 2017. In it, a staff assistant complains that Mrs. Melania Trump refused multiple events and expressed a clear desire to withdraw from her role as First Lady. The evidence dropped like a bomb. The chamber erupted into pandemonium. Senators shouted over one another, some pounding their fists on desks. Reporters spilled into the aisles, phones glued to their ears as breaking alerts flashed across screens. The sound of furious typing and clicking cameras filled the air like thunder. Outside the Capitol, crowds roared louder as live feeds blasted the revelation across every network. The illusion of the perfect family, polished, untouchable, untarnished, was crumbling in front of the world's eyes. The wall was cracking and everyone could see it. The footage, the email, the chain of evidence, it was no longer whispers or speculation. It was collapsing proof, brick after brick, tearing down the stage-crafted image of a flawless marriage. In that chamber, under the harsh lights and relentless cameras, the myth was breaking apart. The happy family was no longer a symbol. It was rubble scattered across the floor. But the room hadn't hit its peak. Jasmine slid a black leather notebook from her case, the edges scuffed and the silver trim flaking under the lights. She held it up so every camera could see the worn cover, a relic that looked like it had survived secrets and storms. Her voice landed one hard beat at a time, steady, courtroom clear. This is the personal diary of Mrs. Melania, obtained legally from a preservation staffer at Trump Tower. A tremor moved through the gallery as lenses tightened and booms dipped lower, hungry for the next line. Jasmine's thumb rested on the spine, and the chamber leaned in, as if gravity itself had shifted toward the book. She flipped to a page marked with a thin red ribbon, then angled the book toward the microphone so every word would carry. The room hushed as she read, slow and cutting each syllable, a step toward the cliff. January 23rd, 2017, I signed the divorce papers. I'm not sure I'm strong enough to go public, but I know this marriage is just a contract. I feel trapped in a political play. The screen behind her filled with a live close-up of the ink, the loops, the pressure marks in the paper. Senators murmured in low shock, staffers exchanged wide-eyed looks, and reporters sprang to their feet, camera shutters clacking in hard bursts. The sound ricocheted across the wood panels like hail, and the still image of the confession seemed to throb with its own pulse. Someone whispered, "It's in her hand," and the gallery shivered. Melania lurched to her feet chair, skidding fury snapping in her voice. "Forgery? That's not my handwriting." Her protest ricocheted off the marble as she stabbed a finger toward the diary, demanding the cameras look away. Jasmine didn't blink. She slid out a sealed folder and lifted a certified report for the room to see. Independent handwriting analysis shows a 98% match to Mrs. Melania's authenticated signatures, she said, tapping the examiner's seal, the date, the chain of custody notation. The gavel hammered for order while the press gallery roared, but the paper in Jasmine's hand held the room by the throat. The proof sat there under white-hot lights, ink pressure, provenance, stacked and undeniable. In that instant, the diary became a spotlight and a mirror exposing the script and daring the chamber to deny what it could plainly see. The diary's last line still hung in the air when Jasmine gave a subtle nod. A soft click, and the chamber speakers came alive with a hiss of room tone. Then a woman's voice, fragile but unmistakable, poured through the microphones. "I cannot continue this marriage, but if I divorce now, it will destroy Donald, and he will drag me down with him." It was Melania, the tremor in her breath sharpening each word to a blade. The gallery inhaled as one, the video lights dimming under the weight of the admission. The chamber went dead silent, a vacuum of sound that confirmed what no one could deny: it was her voice. Even the cameras seemed to hold still, hovering on the vibrating cones of the speakers. A heartbeat later, chairs scraped and Melania lurched forward, face flushed and eyes blown wide. "This recording is illegal. You have no right to play it." Her palm crashed onto the desk, rattling the glass pitchers and sending a harsh pop through the sound system. The gavel pounded for order, but the pounding only amplified the panic whirling through the room. Jasmine didn't move. She waited until the echoes died, then spoke evenly into the mic. "This recording was filed alongside the legal case. The American people deserve to hear the truth from your own mouth." A wall of lenses rushed in, and the frame tightened until only Melania's face filled the screens. Her skin had blanched to porcelain, her lower lip unsteady, her hands trembling on the tabletop. The poise was gone, the auteur erased, and in its place stood the unguarded truth of fear. On that frozen close-up, pride had nowhere left to hide. The last tremor of the recording still hung in the speakers when Melania finally broke. Tears streaked her makeup as she lurched toward the mic, voice torn between anger and surrender. "I only want to protect my son. I don't want him to lose a family." The words hit the wood-paneled room like a confession, raw and unguarded. A hush rippled outward, swallowing the scrape of chairs and the hum of lights. Jasmine didn't gloat. She lowered her voice, but her eyes stayed razor-sharp, fixed and unblinking. "No one blames a mother, but this entire nation has been deceived by a fabricated family. This is no longer a private matter. It is a betrayal of public trust." The syllables landed with the finality of a verdict, each clause pinning the moment to the wall. A few heads bowed, others stiffened as if bracing for impact that had already arrived. Melania's grief ignited into fury. She tore a file from the stack, paper edges snapping as she hurled it onto the table. Enough! The shout ricocheted off marble and glass, a crack of thunder inside the chamber. She pushed back her chair so hard it skidded heels, hammering the aisle as she stormed toward the exit. The gavel pounded for order, but her footsteps pounded louder. She never looked back. The heavy door caught the momentum of her exit and slammed with a report that made a few senators flinch. Dust floated in the light, drifting through the space she left behind, like fallout after a blast. Cameras did not chase her. They stayed locked on what mattered now. The empty witness chair filled every frame, perfectly lit, stark and silent. That emptiness said what no spin could rewrite. The leather seat still held the shape of a posture that had tried to be unbreakable. A single sheet from the burst file lay half off the edge, fluttering in the conditioned air, refusing to fall. The microphone she had gripped so hard now pointed at nothing, red light staring into a void. In that unblinking close-up, pride had no place to hide, and denial had nowhere to land. The door had barely stopped shaking when the first red banner hit the screens. CNN cut to a breathless anchor, and the chyron burned across the bottom. Jasmine Crockett exposes Melania Trump's secret divorce filing. The feed replayed the empty chair, the diary close-up, the audio waveform pulsing like a heartbeat. In living rooms and airport gates and bar TVs, heads snapped toward the screen. Commentators spoke in clipped tones, calling it a political earthquake and a media firestorm in the same breath. Every word sounded like sirens. Over at Fox News, the tone flipped from shock to attack in seconds. A host leaned into the camera, eyes blazing, and the graphics slammed onto the screen. Dirty political conspiracy. Guests nodded hard, framing the hearing as a hit job designed to smear a former first lady and kneecap a former president. They rolled clips of shouting senators and gavel bangs, then called the diary suspect and the audio weaponized. Viewers were told to remember the timing, the theater, the traps. The message was clear: fight back. Online, the clips broke free from television and multiplied like sparks in dry brush. On TikTok, the moment Melania cried played on a loop, the caption, "I only want to protect my son," framed in bold letters. On Facebook, the exit heels striking door slamming racked up millions of shares in hours. On Twitter, 3 tags sprinted to the top of the trends: Shadow Divorce Melania Diary, Melania Tape. Side-by-side edits spliced the inauguration freeze frame with the diary page and the audio quote, turning evidence into a relentless drumbeat. The public didn't need panelists. They had receipts. Inside the Capitol, the hallways turned into live studios. Clusters of microphones sprouted overnight, and lawmakers took turns stepping into the light. Some spoke carefully, saying the hearing raised serious questions about honesty, image, and the manipulation of voters. Others were blunt, calling the evidence damning and the stakes national. Aides hustled back and forth, carrying folders, whispering into phones, eyes locked on their screens. The building felt like it was vibrating from the inside. The opposition laid out its plan in plain terms. In front of a bank of cameras, a senior committee member said they would seek to expand the scope of the inquiry immediately. He called for subpoenas for testimony under oath for financial records and communications tied to the marriage narrative. Then he went further, his voice steady as stone. They would move to subpoena Donald Trump himself. He said the public had a right to know whether a crafted family image had been used as a political tool. He promised transparency start to finish. Republicans answered with equal force, casting the moment as a trap sprung in prime time. One senator, jaw tight, called it a political trap dressed up as oversight. Another said the committee had crossed from governance into spectacle, using private pain to score public points. They argued the diary could be misread, the audio misused, the timeline twisted. They warned that if family was fair game today, no boundary would hold tomorrow. Behind them, aides nodded, the phrase due process repeated like a shield. Pressure shifted east to the New York courts, where clerks faced a storm of calls and emails. Legal commentators walked viewers through the sealing orders, chain of custody forms, and the standards for authenticating recordings. Editorial boards demanded sunlight, urging the court to unseal any filings that could verify or refute the claims. Outside, one courthouse cameras lined the steps, as if waiting for a verdict that hadn't been asked for yet. A court spokesperson said only that all requests would be handled according to law. The appetite for documents outpaced the speed of the docket. Back on cable rounds, anchors sharpened the same question from different angles. Was this about a marriage or about a message sold to a nation? Did the image of unity steer votes, shape donations, or tilt the public square? If a story of love was deployed as armor, did it cross the line between personal and political? Analysts pointed to the diary's phrasing, the date stamps, and the blunt sentence in the audio. Then they put the line on the screen white on black, like a closing argument. If the marriage is fake, then what is real in the Trump administration? In digital newsrooms, editors built timelines that stretched from Inauguration Day to the hearing floor. They dropped pins on moments, the frozen smile, the rumored filing, the quick withdrawal, and linked them to the diary page in the recorded words. Data teams charted the spike in search terms and mapped share patterns that leapt coast to coast in minutes. Headline writers argued for the right verb exposed, unveiled, detonated. Copy desks settled on the word that matched the footage collapsed. And above the fold, the images marched chair page waveform. Meanwhile, the public divided into hard camps and uneasy middle ground. In call-in shows, some voices cracked with disgust, saying they felt gaslit by a fairy tale sold as truth. Others spoke with open sympathy, insisting private choices shouldn't be tried on TV, insisting love can be complicated and still be love. In town square threads and family chats, the diary line drew the sharpest breath, but the audio line sealed the pause. People replayed it and went quiet. A myth felt heavier than a lie because it had been polished to shine. The media drumbeat refused to slow. CNN kept the lower third alive. Jasmine Crockett exposes Melania Trump's secret divorce filing. Fox News kept its counterstrike on-screen, dirty political conspiracy. Split screens showed the two banners side by side, and between them ran the same clip of the same chair, empty and unforgiving. Producers understood the power of absence. They let it sit. The frame said what arguments couldn't, something had broken that wouldn't be fixed by spin. On Capitol Hill, schedules shifted to make room for the next steps that everyone knew were coming. Calendars filled with words like review committee and request. Press offices drafted statements that warned against rushing to judgment while pushing for urgency all the same. Reporters camped the corridors waiting for a leak that might unseal what the court had sealed. The longer the silence from the file room, the louder the hunger at the microphones. And in that space, the question hardened into a test image versus evidence. By nightfall, the country settled into its own uneasy vigil. The footage re-aired on the hour. The diary page reappeared in high contrast. The audio line rolled like a tide. Audiences didn't need narration anymore. They mouthed the words with the clip, "I cannot continue this marriage." Then they waited for the answer that wasn't a slogan or a counterpunch. They waited for paper, for stamps, for signatures, for the kind of proof that sits flat and refuses to move. Across every platform, the same stark thought kept rising to the surface like a warning flare. The story was no longer just about two people or one household or one bad day in a hearing room. It was about trust and what happens when trust is treated like a stage prop instead of a public duty. News sites framed it as a crisis of faith in the story a White House once told. And the headline question kept pulsing, simple and devastating. If the marriage is fake, then what is real in the Trump administration? The thunder of Melania's slammed exit still seemed to echo when the first breaking news banners lit television screens. CNN cut live to its anchor, who spoke with urgency, almost disbelief, as the words burned across the bottom of the broadcast. Jasmine Crockett exposes Melania Trump's secret divorce filing. Footage replayed on a loop, the diary page under the committee, lights the audio recording with its tremor of confession, and finally the violent crack of the chamber door as the former First Lady stormed out. Analysts used the word historic as though it were the only adjective left. BBC followed within the hour. Its anchors spoke with the tone of narrators at a funeral, careful, deliberate, yet charged with significance. They showed the infamous inauguration clip in slow motion, Melania's smile collapsing as her eyes turned toward Donald Trump. The cut then shifted to Jasmine's voice reading the diary line, the words enlarged behind her in brutal clarity. This marriage is just a contract. In France, Le Monde ran an online headline in bold black letters, "The Shadow Divorce Illusion of the White House Exposed." Al Jazeera called it a scandal of stage politics, while NHK in Japan presented it as a lesson in power and deception. The story no longer belonged to America alone. It had detonated worldwide. Back home, even the late-night talk shows abandoned comedy for stunned sobriety. One host walked on stage applause, muted, and simply rolled the clip of Melania crying, "I only want to protect my son. I don't want him to lose a family." The studio audience gasped. For once, no jokes could soften the edges. In print the next morning carried the gravity of history. The New York Times' front page declared, "The Shadow Divorce." The Washington Post wrote, "Crockett shatters the White House myth." The tabloids screamed louder, "Fake first family." On the internet, the story spread like fire across a dry field. TikTok users looped Melania's sobbing plea, overlaying subtitles that made it impossible to miss. On Facebook, the clip of her storming out of the chamber gathered millions of shares, the echo of her heels striking floorboards repeating endlessly. Twitter was a torrent of edits. The inauguration smile breaking the diary entry revealed the audio recording pulsing with her own admission. In every forum, people argued, dissected, shouted, and shook their heads. And in the living rooms of America, especially among older viewers, the betrayal felt intimate. In Ohio, diners men over 50 muttered that they had believed in the fairy tale. In Texas barber shops, customers leaned forward in their chairs, saying the same words over and over. "We were lied to for 4 years." Churchgoers in Georgia debated whether Melania was a prisoner of circumstance or a willing partner in deceit. Some expressed pity, suggesting she had been trapped, silence used. But the majority was harsher. She had smiled on command, played her role, and kept silent even as the machinery of illusion turned. Silence, they said, was not innocence. Silence was complicity. Political talk shows became arenas of combat. On Sunday morning, panels of experts dissected every frame. One professor of political science declared bluntly, "This was never a marriage. This was an instrument, a marketing campaign, a public relations product dressed up as intimacy." The phrase caught fire. By noon, PR marriage ran across cable chyrons, migrated into op-eds, and found its way into casual conversation. The line pierced the last veil. Think pieces multiplied. Cultural critics published essays with titles like "The End of the American Fairy Tale Marriage as Propaganda and When Love Becomes a Political Weapon." They pointed to the inauguration clip as the first visible crack. They underlined the diary's words as a testament of despair, written in Melania's own hand. They played and replayed the audio, each time reminding audiences that it was not rumor, not accusation, but her own voice. They described the entire saga as the collapse of political theater under its own weight. Through this storm of interpretation and condemnation, Jasmine Crockett emerged as the unshakable center. Her face steady under the harsh lights appeared on the cover of Rolling Stone with the headline, "The Woman Who Tore Down the Illusion." The Guardian called her the Congresswoman who ripped away the mask of the White House. Even hostile outlets could not avoid her image. They aired her every line, acknowledging her dominance even as they criticized her methods. Editorials crystallized the moment into one haunting sentence: "She is the woman who tore apart the fantasy of the American first family." The phrase spread until it became less commentary and more scripture. It was repeated in newsrooms, in cafes, and town halls. It became the summation of the event itself. For her supporters, Jasmine was a warrior for truth, a woman who cut through lies with evidence as her blade. For her critics, she was ruthless, theatrical, and merciless. But for all, she was undeniable. And then came the image that would outlive every word. In the chamber, chaos boiled. Senators bellowed across aisles. Aides scurried papers clutched tight. Journalists surged forward, shouting into microphones, cameras flashing like gunfire. The gavel pounded again and again, each strike sounding more like a gunshot than a call for order. But in the center of this chaos, one figure did not move. Jasmine stood still upright, her shoulders squared, her eyes locked forward. A single beam of light fell across her, isolating her from the pandemonium that churned in every corner of the room. Around her, the chamber was a battlefield of sound and fury, but she was motionless, anchored in conviction as if carved from the very stone of the Capitol itself. Cameras caught the frame, and within hours it spread across front pages, news sites, and broadcasts. The still shot became emblematic: Jasmine Crockett, standing tall, while the world spun in frenzy, the diary still on the desk before her, the microphone glowing red at her side. It was the image of defiance of truth, made flesh of a woman, refusing to bow to noise or fear. Audiences did not just see a lawmaker in that frame. They saw a symbol. They saw a line drawn in the sand against deception. They saw a new figure rising in the American story, one unafraid to pierce illusions, no matter how sacred. They saw justice embodied not as a blindfolded statue holding scales, but as a living woman standing against the storm. For days, the media replayed the clip and reprinted the photo each time with fewer words until nothing was needed at all. The picture spoke for itself: Jasmine, the chamber in chaos, and a nation staring at the collapse of its most polished lie. And in conversations across America, one sentiment grew louder with each retelling. It was not just anger at deception. It was not just pity for a family unraveling in public. It was something deeper, a sense that truth, however painful, had finally been forced into the light. And for many, especially those who had once believed in the illusion, that truth was both a wound and a relief. In that final image, Jasmine Crockett did not just end a myth. She became something larger. She became the woman who broke the spell. She became the landmark by which an entire nation measured the line between performance and reality. She became, in the words repeated again and again by anchors, columnists, and ordinary Americans, the woman who tore down the illusion of the White House. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.